economy either. He said on 60 Minutes famously that inflation is something they can control. Deflation is more of a problem. And I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who argue for more targeted stimulus. There are some people out there who argue for a universal basic income, including, well, they're no longer with us, but, you know, from Thomas Paine to Milton Friedman, there's some real capitalists out there who would have argued for a universal basic income. Larry Summers is not one of those people. He is not a fan of that principle, has never been, and he certainly isn't a supporter of $2,000 stimulus checks or letting the economy overheat. Let's get over to Kevin Cirilli right now, Bloomberg chief Washington correspondent, who has spoken to Dr. Summers about this. I think the twist that we saw yesterday, Kevin, is even more fascinating. Mitch McConnell going directly against the president's very outspoken wishes, killing $2,000 stimulus checks by not allowing a quick vote and then wrapping them up with something the Democrats will never agree to.
Three things. First and foremost, it now, because of that move, makes it increasingly unlikely that there is a path forward in the Senate between now and when the Senate turns over to a new Congress for there to be a vote on $2,000 stimulus checks. There is still I would say, a single-digit chance that that still gets happened or still gets a vote. But it's interesting, secondly, the politics of this. And what's gotten lost in President Trump's message is that while he did come out in favor of $2,000 stimulus checks, he also said he wanted to get rid of some of what he said was wasteful spending in the $900 billion bill. So it wasn't just a proposal of $2,000 stimulus checks. He also was proposing correcting some of the funds that were allocated for the pork, as he would describe it, for projects around the country. And then lastly, if you look at this from a matter of Leader McConnell's three items on his to-do list: getting the defense reauthorization bill through today, getting there to be some type of closure as it relates to increasingly contentious vote on certifying the results of the 2020 election, despite the president's continued unfound claims of there being voter fraud, and then also having to fight for Georgia to keep the majority. Leader McConnell yesterday, really on the Senate floor, speaking in a very stoic, somber tone, which is to be expected based upon my reporting of him over the years, but still a to-do list that would make anyone in the last week of 2020 nervous.
Well, and the thing that I find interesting, Kevin, is that Mitch McConnell basically saying, I'll consider more stimulus packages, but he's also, as you said, I want to consider some other things. And you mentioned, an investigation into alleged election fraud. He also wants to rework that law that shields technology companies from liability for user content. It's interesting. What is the goal here for Mitch McConnell? Because those are two issues, obviously, very sensitive and very near and dear to President Trump.
For him, Carol, the goal is to keep the majority for Republicans in the Senate. But in terms of when I spoke with one Republican lawmaker yesterday about whether or not there could still be some type of vote on the $2,000 stimulus checks, you just hit the nail on the head. You could, and again, this is a big if, have a situation where there is a juxtaposed piece of legislation which would have poison pills for various politicians, depending on which camp they are in, where you could lump Section 230 and the Communications Decency Act with something like $2,000 stimulus checks. Well, that presents a really difficult choice for lawmakers who might agree with one of those positions but disagree with another. The bottom line, Leader McConnell is a political chess player. He knows this better than anyone, and he knows what he's doing.
I have to ask you, too, though, is there still some support? Is there any support of the Republican Party and the GOP behind President Trump to continue fighting this election? Because it's interesting that that was still in there.
Polls which suggest that the president, from a political matter, his questions about the legitimacy of the election and the trust in the election process have resonated with the base of the party. There is no evidence to suggest that any election fraud took place. The president's then Attorney General, William Barr, has said as much publicly. And in terms of where this goes, though, from a political angle, Carol, I would note the political strategy of someone like like a Senator Ted Cruz, who's running likely for president in 2024. So he's trying to inherit some of that political argument. Vice President Mike Pence is going to be presiding over these proceedings. He's in a tough spot in terms of keeping the Trump base if he wants to run for president. There's a lot of competing political interests at play right now.
I would say this is why you need term limits. I'm just going to put that out there, Matt, because this way, because people are constantly thinking about, right, Kevin? They're constantly thinking about their next election.
Well, President Trump, back pre-2016, wanted term limits.
Yeah, well, that's interesting.
He still could run again, right, in 2024. I wonder what, Kevin, we should think when we watch these social media companies that are worth so much money and continue to rise in price. Should we be worried that they are stripped of their protections eventually, anytime?
You know, I keep going back to this. Look, I think if there's one trend that Bloomberg has done such an incredible job in terms of reporting, it's how governments around the world are scrutinizing tech companies. Whether it's in China with the Communist Party of China looking at Jack Ma, but here in the United States, there's a process, and so you have Democrats who are arguing that there should be some antitrust investigations, and you've got Republicans arguing that there ought to be a look about how some of these the Communications Decency Act is looked at, and so but there's a process here in the United States that is playing out, and I would anticipate that regulatory forecast and the conversation around that is going to continue regardless of the outcome in Georgia.
Right, not always a perfect process, but it is a process, which is a good thing. Kevin Cirilli, thank you so much. As we've always said, the hardest working man in Washington. So coming up, everybody, we're going to check in with Eric Nelson, Wells Fargo macro strategist. Talk a little bit more about the market trade. It's really quiet. You can see S&P 500 futures just up about 12 points, up 0.3%. But we continue to see some records in some of those big tech names like Apple. So we'll see what he has to say about the outlook for 2021. I'm Carol Massar, along with Matt Miller on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg TV, and this is Bloomberg.
And a very good morning once again, everyone. I'm Carol Master along with Matt Miller. This is Bloomberg Surveillance. John, Lisa, and Tom, they are off on this Wednesday. Quick check on the markets for you, and it's quiet. It's a holiday shortened trading week. We do